Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to part 2 for my platformer shooter series using GameMaker Studio 2. In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to make the gun point towards the mouse and have the character turn around to face the gun. And I'm also going to show you how we can start creating some bullets from the gun's barrel. Let's get started. The first thing we want to do is come into our sprites, and I actually created some sprites that we can use for this, so you can download those in the description, and I'm going to swap those out. So here on this sprite, I'm going to import a sprite here. I'm going to go to desktop and select this character right here, and it says not undoable action. Would you like to continue? Yes, I would. And there we go. We have this little character as our sprite. Then I'm going to go to the gun and I'm going to do import and select the gun right here. It's not undoable. Yes, I'd like to continue. And there we have the gun. Now we want to change the origin just a little bit here because I'd rather have my origin kind of centered right here. And that should fix that. Let's run the game and make sure these new sprites are working correctly. And there we go. We can move around in the room, and we've got some pretty good looking sprites. They're not animated yet, but that's okay. We'll be changing that later. This is a good place to start. Okay. Now the first thing we need to do is make the gun point towards the mouse. So come back into close out of these sprites right here, and come into our objects, come into the player object right here, open this up, and you can see we're drawing the gun right here. Now inside of GameMaker, it uses a direction system, and that direction system looks something like this. Let me actually open up a program here. Okay, and that direction system looks basically like this. You have a plus here like this, and to the right over here is 0 and also 360 degrees, and they're the same, so basically they equal each other. Then you have 90 here, 180 here, and 270 here. And then you'd have all your in-betweens, you know, like 45 here, 135 here, 225 here, and 315 here. And obviously this is how things go. And if we want to get a direction, there's actually a function inside GameMaker that we can use, which is called point direction, and it will return a direction. So we just feed it 2 points. So if we give it, say, a point here and a point here, it will get us whatever this direction is. Let's say this is 60 degrees. It'll get us that direction. So let's hop back into GameMaker now, and we can draw the sprite using that direction. So first we're going to do var dir, which will be short for, well, we'll just do dir, which is short for direction. And we'll say dir equals point direction x, y, so we're going to be pointing from our position to mouse x, mouse y. We'll point to the mouse's position. And then when we draw the sprite right here, instead of just using draw sprite, we can use draw sprite ext. And you can see this will have some different arguments we need to pass in. We need to pass in an x scale. For now, we'll just pass in image x scale. We need to pass in a y scale, so we'll do, actually let's just set both of these to 1. You'd probably want to do image x scale and image y scale if you were going to scale the player sprite as well, but we're not going to, so we don't have to worry about that. Now our rotation, this is actually an angle. So we already got the angle that we want to point, which is towards the mouse, so we can just do dir, which is the angle that we got. And for our color, we'll do image blend, And for alpha, we'll do image alpha, which are the default color and alpha of the current object. Now when we run the game, the mouse or the gun should point towards the mouse. And you can see that's working. It's pointing towards the mouse. Now, I don't really like the origin point right there. It doesn't feel like a good location, but it's not too bad. Let's actually change that just a little bit, but I don't want to change the player's origin because I actually do want it to be centered just in case. Well, actually, let's show you why we don't want to change the player's origin. And to do that, we're going to go on to the next step, and that is we're going to actually draw the player's sprite to make sure that the player also always faces the mouse. And this is going to be a little bit different from what we did before. Obviously, we can't do the same thing we did with the gun. Let's try that actually, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to copy the code that we used to draw the gun, and I'm going to paste in for drawing the player. And draw the player and gun. And we'll just put a comment right here that says draw the gun. Okay. Oops, I actually want this like this. And if we already have the direction, we can put this at the very top actually, just since that's a variable that we're going to need. Draw the player. Okay, so obviously we'll change this to s_player, right? And we'll draw the player. And x and y, 1, 1, dir. We should be able to leave everything else the same. So what happens if we draw the player using dir like this? Well, then the player points towards the mouse too, and that is definitely not what we want. It's actually kind of cool, but it's not what we want. So direction obviously isn't going to work, and so for the direction here, for the rotation, we're just going to put 0, because if you remember, that's no rotation. 0 is no rotation at all. So we put 0, we've got our player sprite. Now let's make a new variable here. Okay, so if we mess with the player's image x scale right here, you can see we're in the x scale. If we set this to -1 instead of 1, you can see that it actually flips our sprite. So that flips the sprite and makes the character face the other direction. And that's what we want it to do, but we only want to do it that when the mouse is to the left of the player. So we could do something like this. We could say var x scale equals 1, and then just say if mouse x is less than x, x scale, and I'm going to take these off right here. Don't need those. X scale equals -1. So this is one approach, and that actually works. So if, well, we have to pass in the x scale then. So in our draw the player, we want to do x scale right here, x scale. And that works. Now you can see the player always faces the mouse. So that technically works, but there's another way that we can do this as well. And it's a little bit more math heavy, but it reduces this to a single line of code. So basically we want a +1 when the mouse is to the right of us and a -1 when the mouse is to the left of us. Well, if we do x scale equals mouse x is greater than x, that's going to give us a +1 when the mouse is to the right of us and a 0 when the mouse is to the left of us. And that's close to what we want, but not quite there, because if we have 0 when the mouse is to the left of us, then our player is going to be invisible when the mouse is to the left of us, because its scale is going to be 0, so it just won't draw it. So that's not quite what we want. We want to get this to be +1 and -1. Well, what's the math that we can do to get that situation? Okay, so what we need to do is we need to take this entire value right here, which is going to be a range from 0 to 1, and we need to multiply this by 2. Now our range is going to be from 0 to 2. Once we've done that, we can then subtract 1 from our range. And our new range will be from -1 to +1, which is exactly what we want. We want -1 when it's to the left and +1 when it's to the right. And you can see that gives us what we need in one line of code. Now the other thing you might want to do is to make the lighting, obviously the lighting's not going to be perfect. I try to do kind of a top-down lighting to help with this. But if you want to make the lighting on the gun flip as well, you can actually pass in our X scale right here, and we'll just call this flip. Flipped. You can pass in flipped to the Y scale of the gun. I think that will give us what we want. And you can see now the gun flips as well, so that the lighting stays from above on the gun. And we're looking pretty good. We've already got our gun following the player. Now let's see what happens when we since we didn't originally like the placement of the gun, let's see what happens when we change the origin here. So let's say, okay, we want the gun to come about right here, like that. That's a better place for the gun to come from, we'll say. Maybe a little higher, like there. Okay, so we've moved our sprite. Now the flipping actually moves a little bit more. And what if we want our gun to come from like right here, clear back kind of where the arm should be? Now I like this position a lot more. That's a much better position for the gun. But look how much our character jumps. That's because when you flip a sprite, it flips on the origin. So when we move the origin, it actually jumps quite a bit, and we don't want that. So let's do our origin back to middle center. So it's right in the center. And in order to fix the placement of our gun and move it over here, you can see all we have to do is adjust the gun's position right here in the sprite. So we're going to say the gun is going to be position Y should be fine, but let's subtract 4 pixels from the X position. So we'll draw it 4 pixels to the left. And you can see that's about where we want it. Now the problem is when we flip, now the gun's clear too far that way. So there's a little trick that we can use here. We can actually multiply this number right here, the 4, by our flipped variable, because it'll be 1 or -1, right? Based on whether or not we're facing right or left. So we're going to do +4 times, actually I think we still want it -4, times flipped. Now that should give us -4 when we're facing to the right, which will be on this side, and +4 when we're facing to the left. And you can see now the character and the gun keep the same position, but they can turn around. But the gun stays on the same position relative to the player. And that's why we don't want to just move the origin of the player to change the gun's position. We can just change where we draw the gun inside of here. Okay, let's create some bullets. I'm just going to create a new sprite. And I'm going to change the size of this sprite to, I think 8 by 8 should be good. It'll be kind of a big bullet, but that's fine for now. I'm going to edit the image, and I'm just going to pick a yellow color for now. This will probably change later. And draw a bullet. Okay. You can do these square for now or whatever. I'll probably be giving you a sprite for these later. Okay, looks good. Let's change it to be S_bullet. And we're going to set the origin of this bullet to middle center as well. So let's zoom in on it so we can see that. There we go. We've got our origin. Let's close. We'll create a new object. Name this O_bullet. Set the sprite. And the code for this should be pretty easy. We can add a create event. So this runs when the bullet is created. We'll just say move towards the mouse. And the easiest way to move towards the mouse is going to be setting the direction. And in this case, it's actually beneficial to use the built-in speed and direction variables, because this bullet doesn't really need fancy collisions with walls, so we can just use in the built-in variables. The reason that we choose to use our own variables for the player object is because using our own variables gives us more control over the collisions. But in this case, we don't need special collisions. We don't need to move up to contact the wall. We're just going to disappear when we hit the wall. So we can say speed equals 5. Direction equals point direction, x, y, mouse x, mouse y. And there we go. We're going to set the speed to 5 and set the direction. And the bullet will just automatically start moving because we're using the built-in variables. And you can see they're green. They don't have an underscore at the end, and they're green. So that's how we know they're built in. And we can run the game, but that's actually not going to do anything. We need to be able to create the bullet. So go back into the player object. We're going to add a new event. Do a mouse event. Select global mouse. And select... Well, let's talk about the difference between mouse and global mouse. So do just normal mouse and do left pressed. Inside of here, we're going to create a bullet. Okay, so we'll say instance create depth. Actually, layer. Instance create layer. The position will be our X position and our Y position. The layer ID. This gets a little confusing, but if you go back into your rooms, you can see we have two layers here. We have an instances layer and a background layer. We want to create our bullets on the instances layer. And the way that we're going to do that is by passing in just the name instances, because this is the name of the layer. So if we come back into our script, you can close out of this tab right here. We just type in instances right here, because that's the name of the layer. And the object that we want to create is the bullet, so O_bullet, and put a semicolon at the end. Now, this is in the left pressed event, so what you're going to notice is when you click in the room, it's not going to create any bullets. However, if you click on the player, now it's creating bullets and firing them in the correct direction. That's the difference between left pressed and global left pressed. The left pressed event is only activated when you actually click on the object. The global left press event is activated when you click anywhere in the room. So that's what we want. You can right click on this event and do change event, go to mouse, global left pressed. Save your game and run it. And this is the event that we actually want. Now we can click anywhere in the room and create a bullet. Now you might be noticing something a little bit funny, and in order to show this a little bit better, we're going to give the bullet a negative depth so that it doesn't go behind the player. It's also going behind the walls, which we don't want. So if we come into the bullet object and we go into its properties, we can actually set the bullet's depth here. So I'll just do depth equals -1 inside the create event. Now a lower depth will show on top of objects with a higher depth. So a negative value is going to show in front of things. And you can see we're creating the bullets right on the center of the player. And that's not really what we want. We want the bullets to be created from the barrel. And that's kind of tricky to do. It's tricky to create the bullets from the barrel. But we need to make sure that we can do that. So come into, close out of these sprites here. Come into the player object. And when we create the bullet right here, there we go. Now it's the right size. Okay. When we create the bullet inside of here, we need to alter the position that we create the bullet at. Now, you might think, oh, well, we can do something similar to what we did with the gun, right? Where we can just move these values a little bit. So like, let's say we do plus 32 on, or plus 16 on the X value and minus 6. Yeah, that's fine. We'll just do that. Now you can see it's creating the bullet from plus 16, but it's always just over to the right, like plus 16 pixels over from the origin of our character. And that's not really what we want either. So what we need to do is we need to come into the draw event and we're going to get the same information, the direction and whether or not we're flipped. We're going to copy this code, come into the create event or the left press event for the bullet and paste it right here. Now we can get the position of the gun, the origin of the gun, which is where the gun is rotating at. And we need to get that position. And it should just be the Y position, but the X position is going to be a little bit different. So var gun X, and this is going to be equal to our X position minus 4 times flipped, right? Because that's exactly how we do it in the draw right here. Minus 4 times flipped, and then Y. So this gives us the origin position of the gun. Now if we create our bullet from the gun X position instead of the X position, this is going to get us creating the bullet from the very center of the gun right there every time. And when we move, it adjusts. So you can see it's doing that. It's creating it from where the gun is positioned. But it's still not creating it from the barrel. So how do we get the barrel's position? And we have to get the barrel's position based on the direction. Well, if you come back into our direction here, the doodle, what we need to do is not only get a direction like this, but we need to use this direction in order to get this point right here. And in order to get that point and then convert it into an X and Y value, right? So what is the X and Y value of this point? Well, that's going to create a triangle, right? Because the X value is going to be, if we pretend that this is now a grid, and this is our X and this is our Y, then the X and Y value are going to be up here. And we're going to say, okay, well, it's this high in the Y and it's this far in the X. And that's going to create a triangle right here. See? This is going to create a triangle where this value right here is going to be our X position, and this value right here is going to be our Y position. Now this is starting to look like trig here. The good news is GameMaker makes this pretty simple for us with some functions that allows us to pass in a direction right here. This is the direction we're pointing. So let's say this is 60 degrees. And then the length of this side right here, which is going to be our length. Okay? and it will automatically spit back out an X and a Y position for us. Now we have to tell it which one we want, whether we want the X position or the Y position, but in both cases we just pass in a length and a direction. And this function is called length_dir. So if we come back in to our GameMaker here, we can get our X offset and our Y offset. Okay, so the X offset is going to be equal to gun X plus length_dir. Well, let's just use the length_dir function here real quick. Length_dir, and that's going to be our length. Our gun has basically a length of 16 if you come into the sprite from here. Well, actually from here to here is close to 32, I think. Our width is 24. So it's 24. So let's say we take off 4 pixels right here. Then we say our length is going to be about 20 to get to the barrel, the end of the barrel, right? So we'll just say 20. So our length is 20. And the direction is going to be pointing towards the mouse. It's that same direction. So we'll just say dir. And that gives us our direction. Now if we do our Y offset is equal to length_dir Y, because this time we want to get the Y value, right? And let's click on this so it zooms in a little bit. This time we want to get the Y value. So this will give us our X value, which is this right here, right? The X length right here. And now we want to get our Y. So we use the different function. We use the length_dir Y function. And we say 20 is the length, and the direction is just going to be dir, the same direction. Now that we have our offsets right here, we can just add these to our current origin where we're creating the bullet from. So gun X plus X offset and Y plus Y offset. And run the game, and it should now create the bullets from the barrel. And you can see that that's working. We're now creating the bullets from the barrel. Finally, the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure that these bullets, because they're going to go on forever. And if you have objects going off into space forever, it's eventually going to start slowing down your game. And so what we want to do is make sure that these bullets are destroyed. And since we have a wall all the way around our room, we can just come into the bullet object, add a collision event. So come into collision with the solid, and we're just going to destroy the bullet. Just call instance destroy, parentheses, run the game, and now the bullet should be destroyed when it hits the wall. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure and like it and share it with your friends. This week has been a bit crazy for me, but I've got more videos on the way. I'm hoping to increase the speed that I create these videos for you guys. So maybe next week, keep an eye out. There might not just be one on Friday. There might be a few more coming earlier in the week. I really appreciate your support, and I will talk to you guys later.